Welcome everyone today to Better Without Pills. Today I have the great opportunity to speak with Michael Kummer. I came across Michael as I was searching around for information. Um, I found that he gave some great overviews of nutritional approaches and also really like that technology and health and other areas are a focus for Michael. And I am so happy that he agreed to have a conversation. Michael, tell our viewers a little about yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks first of all for having me, Doc. Much appreciated. But yeah, I mean, I used to be a professional track and field athlete in my early 20s, and I knew a bit about exercise, but very little about nutrition and sleep and stress management and all the other factors that go into, performing optimally as a human, mentally as well as physically. And so I was injured a lot. There was a lot of pain involved, in trying to fix those injuries and all. But it never really occurred to me that the way I was living my life was maybe not super conducive to optimal performance. Despite of that, I somehow managed to at least, get like to, come in as number 5 in Europe in my age category, and I think number 20 or so in the world,
Fantastic.
over 100 meters. But at some point, I'm like, you know what, this isn't, I don't, I get injured too much. It's not really leading anywhere. So I switched to technology, which was another passion of mine. And so I, started my own company, then moved to Switzerland, came to the US, all as part of, the technology, pursuing technology as my career. And I adopted the American way of life, unfortunately, especially the eating and the standard American diet. And that didn't really sit so well with me, literally as well as, figuratively, because I had irritable bowel syndrome, so I had gut issues all the time. My physique and my body composition, changed not to the better. And at some point we met a couple, and the guy was following a Paleolithic diet, and I knew nothing about that at the time, but just thought it was weird that he wouldn't be eating, he would exclude certain entire food categories from his diet. I'm like, I mean, whatever, you do you. And but at some point both my wife and I then actually, we came across a documentary on Netflix that talked about the amount of added sugars that the average American would consume every year. And we are like, this is ridiculous. I mean, there's pounds and pounds and pounds of added sugars. And I'm like, that can't be good. So we started removing all foods that had added sugars from our diet and from our pantry to start with. And it turned out that our pantry was empty after going through, all the processed foods we had at home. And that was really the beginning of questioning dietary advice as we get it from, the authorities, so to say, and also questioning the way, we were raised, and questioning what changed, especially in the last few decades, because my parents weren't overweight and they just followed whatever diet, we had in Austria. It was more like Mediterranean influence, but it still wasn't nowhere near as, I guess, educated as I think our diet is now. But they seem to be somewhat fine. And I'm like, okay, what is different? What is happening in this country in particular that makes people so unhealthy? If you look around, and I always, do that exercise when I board an airplane, I sit down and I watch all the people coming by and I count the ones that appear to be metabolically healthy.
Interesting.
And there are very few. I mean, maybe there is sometimes, a person, maybe two, but that's pretty much it. Everyone else has metabolic issues. And I'm like, this is unbelievable, and it has obviously a lot of downstream consequences. And so we, investigated more and more, and I'm like, okay, paleo is really a good start, but maybe keto is even better. So I played around with a ketogenic, very low carb ketogenic diet for about 3 years. And I've come to realize that keto is a great tool, but doing it long term all the time, especially based on at that point, we had picked up CrossFit and, later kickboxing. And so a lot of high intensity type of glycogen depleting workouts, and I'm like, okay, just relying on gluconeogenesis, the process of where your body makes glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, is not incredibly efficient if that happens every single day, every day of the year. So we're like, okay, maybe keto isn't the right thing. And we also discovered that keto these days, the modern keto diet, is very far removed from the Paleolithic idea of how we should be eating, with all the processed keto cookies and keto this and keto that. and I'm like, okay, this is not really what we want to do either. And so I experiment a little bit with carnivore, just eating meat and eggs. And I felt well, and it was, I was used to it from the keto perspective, from the low carb, high fat kind of thing. But again, it didn't make me feel great especially on days where I worked out and depleted my glycogen stores, and then waiting for them to be replenished. It led to like, my sleep wasn't as great anymore, and I was, my energy levels weren't as they should have been. And so we ended up with an animal-based diet, following, very much the principles of Paul Saladino, where you can have, sweet fruits, seasonal fruits, and some of the least toxic plants. We since expanded it a little bit to follow more the principle of not only what you eat, but how you eat it, or how you prepare food. How do you process certain plant foods to mitigate some of those toxins that they all have, be it, fermenting, sprouting, soaking, heating, all the tools that humans have acquired over the years as part of evolution to make food more fit for human consumption. So we started kind of, playing with this very much along the lines of Dr. Bill Schindler, Eat Like a Human, he calls his book. So that's a very interesting read. And so that's kind of, the mix where we are right now, where we really listen to how are we responding to certain foods. Just because something is supposed to be healthy or unhealthy doesn't always mean it's good or bad for you. Like, I don't do well with bananas. Bananas per se are not a bad food. They are sweet, they are seasonal, they are meant to be eaten. They are relatively low in, anti-nutrients. I don't do well on them. On the other hand, sourdough bread, home baked, I seem to be doing fairly well, or at least I haven't noticed any issues. So, it really depends a little bit, but, listening to your body, looking in the mirror. So is this how I want to look like? Is this how I want to feel? Is this how my blood work is supposed to look like? And if I can say yes to all of those factors, then I'm probably on a decent path, And so that's kind of how we approach it these days.
I heard an interesting question. Actually, Dr. Westerman, who is, I think, a pioneer of sorts in the low carb area, and he asked an interesting question of, is it what we add to the diet or what we take away from the diet as we work our way down? And I feel like I followed a similar path, and I think I think it becomes, you realize that the stuff that's in boxes and mostly in cans and processed and ultra processed is problematic, and you tend to feel better as you simplify, and then you tend to work your way down, and it becomes a balance of carnivore in a way is more restrictive, but then again, it's a little more straightforward that you have your list of do's and don'ts. Do you feel, and maybe you've already answered it, that it's probably all the above, but that it's what's being taken away or what's being added that seems to help you the way you're feeling?
I think it's a combination. I think the immediate gratification you can very often get from removing harmful foods. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why many vegans appear to be doing so well in the beginning, because if they remove all the junk food, all the processed food, and stick with only, organically grown vegetables, then chances are you're probably doing better at first until, you run into some of those nutrient deficiencies over time, which might take, 3-4 years to develop or to really, manifest. So I think removing crap food is the best first step you can take. It's usually also the easiest one, to just say, okay, cook your meals from scratch using single ingredient foods. You're probably going to be very well off for a while, to heal, to get better, and then to figure out what it is that you can and cannot, get away with. And so, but on the flip side, then I think, what a lot of people, the mistake a lot of people do is, not consume enough protein, good protein, especially from animal-based sources, because proteins are the building blocks. Fat is a building block. It's not only energy, as most people believe. The only, pure energy is carbohydrates, is glucose. Everything else is used for structure, for making hormones, for a lot of things on the body. And so by restricting those, I think you're going to run into issues in the long run. So it's a combination of both, I want to say, but I would probably start with removing stuff that's not good for you, and then figuring out what you need to add to maintain optimal health.
Can you give a quick summary of what like the paleo diet, maybe in differentiating because we kind of worked our way down that continuum there. Maybe just touching on paleo, what you think maybe the pros and cons, which I know I really like that your article was really good about coming down to that clarifying that.
Right. Yeah. So the paleo diet, the idea of the paleo diet is to mimic the diet of our ancestors, especially the ones before, 10,000 years ago, roughly, when humans started, agriculture and domesticating animals and stuff. So any food that we could potentially hunt or gather or, collect in the wild is paleo friendly. And so that includes obviously, all the animal meats. It includes, most plants with the exception of legumes, maybe, so peanuts and grains, all of things that you would not necessarily find in the wild, 20,000 years ago, at least not in greater quantities. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there was grains growing somewhere, but it's not like today where we can, harvest an entire grain field and make flour out of it. And so legumes, grains would be off limit, but you can have nuts and seeds and veggies and fruits and seafood and many of those things. What you can't have on paleo, which I don't necessarily agree with, is dairy. I agree with that processed dairy is probably not good for you because the pasteurization and all the things that we do to it to make it, quote-unquote, safer, is denaturing some of the proteins, it's killing enzymes, it's killing, our beneficial bacteria. It changes the food. It's not the same food. Ultra processed milk is not the same as raw milk, from a nutritional perspective. And so, removing dairy completely, I mean, some people do better with it. But I find that with raw dairy, I do very well. And I think it's, for many people, they can and should include raw dairy if you can find it, if it's legal in your state to buy it, which is another thing I think is ridiculous that we are not allowed to buy raw dairy for human consumption in some states. But that's in a nutshell paleo. Keto is very much focused on macronutrients, right? It means high fat, the classic keto diet, at least high fat, moderate amounts of protein, and very low carb. Maybe up to 25-ish or so grams of carbs per day, depending on who you ask and what flavor of the keto diet you want to follow. And the idea is to simply allow your body to burn fat instead of glucose for energy, getting into ketosis, right? Burning ketones. And but it doesn't necessarily restrict what you can have within that macronutrient framework. So you could be consuming seed oils, canola oil and stuff like that, and be high fat, low carb, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good for your health. So you might get benefits in terms of the maybe initial weight loss because your body burns fat for energy. But as with if you take if you consume the wrong types of fat, you might get into an inflammatory cycle down the line, and you stall. Maybe you actually gain your weight back, and you're probably not going to feel very good. So keto very much macronutrient focused, not so much ingredient quality focused. Paleo diet more ingredient quality focused, especially focusing on those foods that we would have consumed before we started farming and domesticating animals. And so that's why at some point I actually combined both and said, you know what, I want to do a Paleolithic ketogenic diet that takes all of the ingredient quality focus of paleo and puts them into a ketogenic low carb framework, right?
Yeah. As far as ketosis, or the word keto, of course, comes from the fact that ketones and potentially becoming fat adapted as opposed to glucose or carbohydrate dependent. Do you, as far as the focus on being in ketosis or even monitoring for that, can you comment on your experience and your perspective on that?
Yeah. So I still to this day, even though I'm consuming most of the days up to 150 grams or so of carbs, which is clearly not, it's a low carb diet by definition, but obviously not a ketogenic diet. But I still aim to have residual ketones in my breath when I wake up in the morning or before I have my first meal. So I'm aiming to remain metabolically flexible enough so that if I have to skip a meal or don't eat an entire day, I don't fall apart, because my body is still capable of not only burning through my stored glycogen, but potentially also tapping into burning fat. dietary fat or body fat, for fuel. And so I think that's, for me at least right now, is the most important aspect to maintain metabolic flexibility, to not be so focused on carbohydrates or as glucose as my primary source of fuel, so that if I don't have it, because glucose, is a very fast burning source of energy, as you know, if I don't have that for a while, I don't want to fall apart. Even though I can certainly tell, if I consume carbohydrates in the morning, which is why I try to avoid that, I feel a dip in energy in the afternoon, especially mentally. And so that's one of the reasons why, even though I consume a good number of carbs within a 24-hour period, I usually try to push my carb intake to the afternoon, so that I remain sharp in the morning and all through, the day until in the afternoon, where I wind down anyway, I go for a walk with the dog, I play with the kids, I feed our chickens, whatever the case might be, but I don't have to be mentally sharp, as sharp as I would usually be again. And so I can definitely tell it. But if I'm in ketosis, there is no question in my mind that the brain craves ketones, and it works exceptionally well with burning ketones for energy. And I can tell, and that's actually one of the reasons why occasionally, when I have research intense articles to write, or if I'm on a podcast, I supplement with exogenous ketone esters. So I get the benefits of the ketones without necessarily having to be on a ketogenic diet every day.
Will you use, and I know technology is an area that you focus on, will you use different devices to measure your level of ketosis, or have you?
Yeah, actually, coincidentally, I have this Biosense breath ketone meter. That's the one I usually do. I used to do, my finger prick test kind of in the very beginning, urine test strips, but they're just, give you a rough idea of if you're in ketosis or not, but not more. And with the finger, it started getting expensive and cumbersome to do it all the time. Now these days, if I just want to do a spot check, I use Biosense. Very
Yeah, tell us a little
non-invasive.
about how you use that, and maybe some of the logistics, if someone considers using that device.
So the reason why I use it is because breath ketone is the best, one of the best indications of how your body is using ketones and if it's using it, right? You can have blood ketones potentially, but that might not always be translating. If you measure BHB, one of those ketone bodies, one of the 3, I think, or so ketone bodies that are out there, how your body is utilizing those ketones with if you measure acetone, it's a very close approximation of how your body is utilizing those ketones. And so I don't use it every day, but occasionally when I say, what, I have not eaten carbs now yesterday, I want to see, am I still in ketosis, or do I still have residual ketones in my breath? I use it on, occasionally. Right now, I'm using it more consistently because I'm about Memorial Day weekend is usually our Murph workout. It's a very intense CrossFit workout, and we often precede that by a 2-day fast, so we can kind of mimic a couple of days of unsuccessful hunting, and then at the end of the workout, where we are completely wiped out, we then have our meal. And so I just keep tabs on how I feel versus how my ketosis levels are, to kind of gauge if how I feel matches what my body thinks it's doing.
What are the ranges I mean, will that, I know often with the blood, 0.5 is kind of maybe a starting point of being in
Yeah.
ketosis. You get up beyond 3 or 4, that's pretty deep. I mean,
Yeah.
we have to, and just to touch on, of course, ketoacidosis is something that diabetics have to be concerned about, where their ketones might be 10 or more.
Right.
But as far as the range that you might see with that, how does that device reflect or
Yeah.
compare?
So it measures so-called ACEs, and a unit of acetone, and that roughly it's like a 10-fold difference. So if you mentioned 0.5, the beginning of nutritional ketosis, as far as your BHB levels in the blood are concerned, you would see 5 ACEs on this device. And so usually measuring the last few days, I'm somewhere between 0.4 to 1.6, depending on meal timing and everything, and insulin response to what I eat and those kind of things. But that's roughly where I usually am. During at the end of a 2-day fast, I'm usually in the 30s. So it's like 3 point something, that I would see in the blood.
Interesting. You have mentioned in one of your reports, I thought to be interesting, when you were summarizing other dietary approaches, that there were various mainstream diets, and you had thoughts on why they may be good or bad, or even, frankly, what you might suggest avoiding. Maybe you can touch on some of the more some of the more mainstream things that people might see in the news or hear about on social media.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, the big things right now is, plant-based diets, which, as I alluded to before, it's very often you see immediate results, positive results, because going vegan means removing junk food for the most part. Even though there's a lot of vegan junk food creeping in, highly processed, be it a Beyond Meat or, the food-like substances like that. If you look at the label, like 50 ingredients, none of which I would consume individually and certainly not in combination. And then, just the processing method of, well, anyway, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion, but, plant-based diets, I think have gained popularity for all the wrong reasons. Because nutritionally, I think they are terrible in the long run. There is nothing in plants that I found that humans need to thrive. If you consume only animals, you get everything that you need in the most bioavailable and readily absorbable form, be it, heme iron, be it retinol instead of beta carotene, be it vitamin K2 instead of the K1 that you find in plants, be it B12 that doesn't exist in plants at all, biotin. There are so many things in that we need that are essential for us that you don't find in plants. And plus, there are a lot of anti-nutrients, defense chemicals that plants have. I mean, if you think about it, no living thing wants to be eaten, right? And that includes animals, of course, but they run or they fight for the most part, or hide. Plants, they usually don't run. They have either thorns in some cases, or most commonly, they have defense toxins, that they release, sometimes in response to the vibrations of a caterpillar chewing on their leaves. That's a trigger for them to release chemicals to deter that caterpillar from eating the second half of that leaf, and all of those toxins are not good for us. Some are less of an issue, some are more of an issue. If you eat certain types of beans raw, you can die. If you eat a potato raw, you're in trouble. But even, spinach and leafy greens in particular, high in oxalates, that can lead to kidney stones and all kinds of, issues. And so I think that's, from a nutritional perspective, very much misguided. But then the second big argument is, well, but it's good for the planet and it's good for the animals if you don't, kill animals. Now, I encourage everyone to grow their own veggies in their own garden and try to do it organically, meaning not spraying anything, because of course, when you spray pesticides, you kill pests, you kill other animals, even if it's only insects. You might not be killing Bambi, but you're killing something, you're killing an animal by treating those plants. And that's only in your little garden. And so we have a garden, even though we don't eat a whole lot of plants, but we've realized that there is always something trying to eat your plants. And so what do? If you don't want to spray, you pick off those caterpillars and we feed them to the chickens, but we're actively ending the life of other animals so we can eat those plants. And that's on a small scale, right? Imagine a big scale of a monocrop field where they spray the entire thing, kill everything that ever lived there, microorganisms in the soil, all the insects, then they mow it and kill rabbits and rodents, other rodents and deer and everything that lives in there. And so I'm like, at least when I kill an animal, like if I'm hunting and I kill a deer, I eat what I kill, right? I don't kill stuff that's gonna rot then, and because I'm not eating it, I want to eat the plant. So from that perspective, to me, pure plant-based diets don't make any sense whatsoever. And then the last thing that I would encourage, if people say, well, but isn't that aren't humans supposed to eat only plants? I would encourage you, go out in the wild and try to only survive on plants. And I can tell you, you will die within a couple of weeks. You might also die because you can't hunt. If you don't have the skills or you don't see any animal, you might still die, even if you wanted to eat animals. But one thing is for sure, humans cannot survive on only plants. Usually most vegans that I encounter, they supplement. They need extra input to bridge, deficits that they have because of their diet. I'm like, if you need supplements to maintain a diet, it's probably not the right diet for you, And so that's kind of that's the main thing with the plant-based, but they're also within keto. Even, modern keto, as I've mentioned before, is probably not what it's supposed to be. And even the paleo diet, you can make everything paleo. If you consume, sweet potatoes and a gallon of maple syrup every day, you're following a Paleolithic diet. But it's not really, in the sense of how the paleo diet was supposed to be defined. And so,
can you touch on another aspect is fiber when there's focus on vegetables and potentially vegetarian type diets? What do you feel about the pros and cons of fiber?
I don't think it's necessary for humans to consume fiber, period. That doesn't mean you cannot, or that some people, might do okay with it, but I don't think it's a necessity. The idea of consuming sawdust at the end of the day to bulk up your stool, I consume predominantly meat, and I have no issues going to the bathroom on a regular basis. I don't have, I have actually less stool volume because of that, because there is less residue, that the body cannot use. And I don't have a rumen, so I'm not fermenting, those things in my stomach to extract nutrients. I leave, that to cows and to other ruminants. But I think fiber is entirely overrated. And even the idea of, there is now, research coming out that, feeding your good bacteria might not always be a good thing, because when those bacteria die, they also release potential toxins that might not be good for your health. And, obviously, as bacteria grow, they die. It's a natural cycle. The more you have, the more you grow, the more, end up dying too, because there's only so much room in your gut, right? It's not that there are empty spots, that wait to be, inhabited. Everything is covered, in good, bad, or something in between. And so I don't really see the need for fiber, and none of the pure carnivores that I know, have told me that, oh, I wish I had more fiber in my diet because, I'd like to have more stool volume,
Yeah, a lot of my focus is on seeing patients who have symptoms, including pain in their joints and various parts of their body. Often, as I will discuss what people experience, it seems like inflammation is an issue, and I have a concern that whether it be fiber or other things that can be tough on the GI tract allow for greater penetration, and then the body has a autoimmune response. Sometimes people will have diagnoses, including types of arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, endometriosis, interstitial cystitis, where there's inflammation of the bladder. And it's interesting how I'll see someone have 2, 3, or more of these problems, polycystic ovary, other things, and that as I've come down, the course of this, and between my personal concerns and also the concerns, of course, of patients and people I'm trying to help, I try to keep that perspective. And it's the name of my podcast, Better Without Pills, is kind of inherent as that, is trying to see, is there another cause we can put a finger on. Partly, people will say to me they wish they have a new body, and the only way I can give someone a new body is to maybe point them in the direction of a nutritional approach where they can build one brick at a time. And of course the GI tract plays a role in our absorption. And so I mean, all you've touched on with fiber overlaps with concerns that I see clinically. One thing that I looking at what you do, between your experience and your actually your company, that you do have supplements that you offer. Tell us a little about what you offer and why they may play a role in health.
Yeah, I like to think that we offer whole food ingredients in a capsule form. So, with supplements, first of all, a supplement is always meant to supplement everything you're already doing. It's not meant to replace proper diet. And the type of supplements that we have are freeze-dried organ meats. And again, they are not meant to replace anything, but they are meant for people to or meant to help people to find their way to consuming organs, ideally fresh. But as you might know, not everyone likes the taste of fresh organs or cooked organs. In particular, liver has a very strong taste and a funky texture that not most people don't appreciate. And even I prefer my liver raw. Cooked liver, not my thing. So I understand where most people are coming from. But the thing is, I strongly believe that organs are one of the best, if not the best, source of micronutrients for humans in terms of vitamins and minerals and specific peptides that are part of that organ tissue that you can use to bridge any gaps that you might have in your diet, because nobody's diet that I know at least is perfect. And even the food, especially on a plant-based side that we grow today, is not as nutritious anymore as it used to be because of deteriorating soil quality and the use of pesticides and everything that comes with it. And so, or even if you look at the organic strawberries you can find at Costco, they are not grown in soil; they are grown in in a hydroponic environment that never, those strawberries or the plants never touched soil. So are they as nutritious as strawberries grown in rich soil? I would argue probably not. And so even if you buy the best type of veggies and fruits and meats, etc., you can buy, there might still be gaps in your diet. Because most people don't eat nose to tail anymore. They eat the steak, and that's it, and maybe some eggs. So my idea with launching that supplement brand was to have a whole food type of supplement that can help you bridge any gaps you might have, and to include any organs that you would not be eating otherwise, be it liver, be it heart and spleen, be it bone and marrow, those kind of things that are either difficult to source and keep fresh at home, or that you don't like the taste of.
Have you tracked your blood work to see? I mean, one concern that people have is how their cholesterol and lipids will be. Is that something you've focused on in your situation, or
Yeah.
people you
Yeah,
talk?
I check. I do a very comprehensive blood panel every 3 months, just to see how different interventions and different dietary changes and lifestyle changes impact certain things. Blood lipids are, honestly, I mean, with the exception of HDL and triglycerides, are the least of my concerns. So especially total cholesterol and LDL. I mean, unless I'm way off base, I'm not concerned about. So high cholesterol is not a thing, or is not an issue in my opinion. High LDL is not a thing unless you've oxidized LDL particles, which you can test for if that's a concern. But just based on my lifestyle and my diet, and I did the particle test and I did the calcium score scan and everything to kind of back up what I think is happening. And so again, total cholesterol and LDL not a concern for me. I look more for inflammatory markers. I look, for my endocrine situation. What are my hormone levels doing? I look at my insulin levels. That's one of the main things that I really look at to make sure that I remain sensitive to insulin, which is the opposite, obviously, of insulin resistance.
Sure. Would that be a fasting insulin, or do you look at
Yeah, I usually do fasting insulin. And make sure that stays. Usually it's actually below the low cutoff. So for many years it was 1.8 and the low is 2.0. So and nobody could tell me, at least not the regular doctors, is this an issue? And then I talked to Dr. Ben Bickman, who is a researcher in the low carb kind of movement, and someone that I really trust and admire. And he said it just means that you're incredibly insulin sensitive, which is a good thing. And so those are the things that I look at. And also there are some, I actually wrote an article about all the blood markers that I look for and that I recommend people look for, because many of those are not even part of the regular annual exam. If you just go to your doctor and have your blood work once a year, you don't get a fasting insulin, you don't get a CRP in many cases, you don't get testosterone, you don't get many of the things that I'm like, those are the things you want to look at, not your total cholesterol or your LDL, and then have someone tell you need statins to lower your cholesterol. It's all reverse, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, again, I'm trying to at least show another side of things. I do as I see people come in the office, I often will say, "How is your diet?" And I've learned that they're either the people who will say that they know or feel like their diet just is bad, or some people will feel their diet is good, and then when I dig deeper and say, "Well, tell me more about your diet," and it's not
Mhm.
necessarily bad, but maybe more of the mainstream and
Yeah.
overlapping the standard American diet. And I do wonder now if you were if someone came to you and they were basically on just your more standard American diet, are there starting steps, or how might you direct someone in their approach to changing their nutrition?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing is you want to do is take control of food preparation. Be involved, prepare your own meals, use single ingredient foods, source locally if possible, and focus on on a well raised and responsibly raised animal based products. Stop consuming processed foods. Don't leave it up to someone else to put together what you put in your body. Those people don't have your health in interest. That's not one of their concerns. And then remove seed oils and highly processed carbohydrates. Stick to stuff that, again, going back kind of to the Paleolithic principle, stick to what you could hunt or gather. The low fat cookies from your grocery store is not something you would find in nature. So even if if you're leaning more plant-based, I think it's still better grow your own veggies, or find local sources of organically grown vegetables, and combine it with animal-based protein and fats, and just use the basics: butter, ghee, tallow, lard, those kind of things that your grandma or grandmother would have cooked with, and stop using industrial seed oils, and you'll probably be on a good path to understanding more. And then get involved in raise your own food, be it growing your own tomatoes, or grow your own animals if you have the opportunity, and butcher them. Know what it takes, where the ribeye comes from, where the brisket is. I knew nothing of that. And then the other day when I with my little one, with a 7-year-old, we were butchering the deer that I hunted, and we came across all those different parts. I'm like, "Ooh, that's where the brisket is." I had no idea. And that's where and he was playing with the trachea and stuff, and kind of getting an understanding. This is the food we eat, or our dog eats, and this is where it came from the animal. And most people have no idea of where the fillet is from, or the ribeye is from, or even what animals your ribs come from. So
Um, of course, practicalities. Someone may find that whenever they look to get, if they don't have access to freshly or locally grown like wild stock, like you're mentioning, if someone realistically can't finds they can't afford grass fed, comment on on that compared to I guess when you're in that situation, what might you
I think
check?
the cheapest meat from ruminants, be it you go to Costco and get ground choice beef, or cube steak, or inexpensive cuts. I mean, I know that meat generally is expensive, or more expensive than processed food. I mean, if you look at the even water is more expensive than Coke, which is ridiculous. But if you find inexpensive meat, at least if it's without, most of the meats today are without hormones, at least that step I think most manufacturers have taken. Even if it's grain fed, know that all cows are grass fed for a period of their life. So if you, and that's another thing, just grass fed doesn't mean anything, because every cattle is grass fed at some point. Calves cannot eat grains, they would die. So every cow is grass fed, and then whether or not you get grass finished, I think the difference in nutrition is there, but not having the meat because it's grain fed is not ideal. It's much worse than going for a Beyond Burger, or going for cornflakes, or whatever the case might be. Some processed junk food that's definitely not good for you. So go for the cheapest meat. Get yourself a slow cooker. At the dollar store, whatever. If the meat is chewy, just slow cook it for 24 hours. Every meat you put in there comes out soft, I promise. use, broth or water and salt and whatever, spices you can get away with and you like, and it'll taste good. Buy eggs, even if they're not the best, soy, corn-free pastured eggs. Some half decent eggs at Costco are better than not eating eggs. So I think there are ways. It might still be more expensive than going with pure junk food and going, get a Happy Meal every day, 3 times a day. I understand, but if you do that, you will pay for those choices at some point. And health bills, as I'm sure you know, are usually more expensive than making proper food choices, when you're still somewhat healthy.
Great. Have you, I did see you made some comment on continuous glucose monitors, CGMs. Is that, maybe comment on whether you feel that plays a role, or at least some people may use that at least at a point to get a perspective?
I think it's a great tool. I learned a lot. I learned that I dump massive amounts of glucose when I work out. I had no idea that would happen, And so, because sometimes I'm like, why are my ketones so low after I work out? I just, burned, glucose. I must, but no, actually, the body dumped glucose in to make it available for fuel, probably a little bit more than what I needed in the moment, because, my body doesn't know when the workout is completed, or if there is more, And so that's one of the things that I learned. I also learned that stress can raise your glucose level. So there are things that are very valuable that I gleaned from wearing glucose monitors, continuous glucose monitors for a while. I don't do it on a every day anymore, because I'm not concerned if eating a banana raises my blood sugar. I know it goes up and then it goes down, and I'm done with it. Obviously, if you want to find out, okay, how does a banana compare, or like real food compare to consuming a regular pizza, and you see that your blood sugar keeps spiking all throughout the night, and then why you slept like crap, that's valuable. But for me, that I know that I know what I eat and what it does to my body, I don't need a glucose monitor anymore, and I'm not concerned about maintaining stable blood sugar levels. I think that's another direction where people are going, that get so hung up on certain biometrics that I think having a flat, blood sugar curve is the best possible thing you can do. I don't think that's the case. There is a reason why we have insulin, to remove blood sugar from our, glucose from our bloodstream and use it for energy. I don't think there is anything inherently bad about having a spike, as long as that spike is not, as the curve is not super wide, and you don't keep like going up and down because you ate something that you shouldn't have eaten in the first place. So that's my take on it. Useful if you're in the beginning, if you want to figure out, what is what and how does it work. But in the long run, I don't think you need to be wearing a blood glucose monitor for the rest of your life.
Great. Maybe you can summarize. You compile a lot of great information, and maybe whether it be your website or your blog, or your other social media, maybe tell us how we might approach, because I think that you pull together a lot of information, a lot of practical, and between science and practicality. I really appreciate your approach.
So I think that I consider there are like 8 or so core principles that I like to follow or keep in mind as I navigate the modern life and try to make it as compatible to my physiology as possible. So I like to to focus on sleep, nutrition, obviously, exercise, stress management, tribalism. Just having a feeling of belonging is one thing that's, I think, incredibly important for our mental health in particular. And regular sun exposure, like hormesis, exposing yourself to stressors that can make you more resilient, those kind of things. So those are kind of the principles I try to adhere to. And then whenever I want to improve something, I mean, I personally, I'm someone who goes all in with most of the things that I do, and not caring about what the consequences might be. For most people, that's not feasible. So I recommend, if you do something, take a small step, do something better today than you did yesterday, and take the small victories, because that's for your brain in particular, that win is incredibly important to keep you motivated. I think that's one of the reasons why some people say make your bed first thing in the morning because it's a victory. You know, you get a hormone release, a positive feedback in your brain because you have accomplished something. And so taking the small victories and building up as you learn, as you navigate the complexities that is, you know, living in a modern world, while trying to apply ancestral principles, you know, it's difficult. You know, it's easy to get overwhelmed, but, you know, take those small steps and listen to your body and see how you feel. Don't just be, you know, person A said do this and I follow this even though I feel crappy. No, you know, listen to how you feel, how your body responds to certain things, and try to figure out what works for you, and then keep doing it. Don't see this as a lifestyle. You know, it's not going on a 30-day, you know, a whole 30, you know, whatever diet, and then going back to your old way of eating. Waste of time, waste of resources. You know, find something that works for you, that you can do every day, and be mindful that most people, you know, have terrible health because of their lifestyle. And so you're probably gonna be different to them, and be okay with being different, because you can be the next one that someone looks up to and say, hey, I want to be like him. You know, I want to make those changes because I want to have his body or his energy levels or his health, or whatever the case might be. You know, be a role model, you know, and embrace that. I mean, we all are at different levels on that journey, and there are some people who want to be like me, and I'm, you know, and I want to be or as healthy or as whatever the case might be as other people. But, you know, we're always looking, you know, for someone to kind of lead the way, and so be that leader. You know, you can be that leader as well.
Yeah, it does seem like taking that approach is swimming upstream between, you know, what the articles that make the news, and knowing there's a lot of money in big food, big pharma.
Yeah,
Um, you know, when bringing up the concept of a statin, bringing up the concept of a diet that has more meat, um, saying that as you get into this kind of diet, you may need to have more salt. What we touched on fiber. I mean, it definitely is going against what we've been kind of
yeah.
bathed in, particularly in America, throughout our life. I guess you had a chance to get the European approach to some degree, and um, it's you know, I really like your perspective. So if people want to get more information from you, and I'll make sure to whatever I can to put
Mhm.
down below. But where might you direct people to try to
Yeah,
learn more?
I mean, my blog is probably, you know, the best resource, michaelkummer.com, and then you can find me on Instagram on mkummer82 is my handle there. I also have a YouTube channel under my name. But the blog, typically, you know, if you find that, it links to everything else that I'm, you know, kind of doing, and you can go from there. But, you know, one thing that you know, because you mentioned it, you know, find a healthcare provider that doesn't just follow, you know, what the USDA, you know, is pushing in terms of, you know, how you, or the FDA or whatever, you know, agency that does not necessarily have your best interest or your best health in it and interest. So find a healthcare provider like you know, who can afford to think outside of the box. You know, unfortunately, most doctors don't have either the expertise, the willingness, the capacity, the guts, the balls, whatever you want to call it, to do something different and not just prescribe, you know, medication to treat a symptom instead of trying to investigate the root cause. And that's one of the reasons why I, you know, stopped going to doctors. I get my blood work, I look at it myself, and I know where I'm at. You know, I don't want to hear that I should be eating more plants to get my nutrients. You know, I've heard it. You know, that's not valuable advice to me anymore. You know, and so I'm glad, you know, that there are doctors out there who, you know, understand that nutrition and everything else around our lifestyle can play a significant role in the progression of disease, and, you know, your risk of developing a chronic or metabolic disease. You know, and so,
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I think we touched on a lot of important topics, and thank you so much for speaking to me. I hope we get a chance to talk again. But it's been great to meet you on Better Without Pills. If people like this kind of conversation, maybe you could subscribe or hit like below. But thank you, Mike, for taking the time to speak to us and sharing such wonderful information. It's been great to talk to you.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.